I am Dr. Sherwana Davis, a psychotherapist, here to provide a review of Spaceman. Like most movies, it was entertaining to watch, but also full of some psychological lessons learned. I will start this off by giving you a spoiler alert that I will be talking about the movie and things and scenes that happened in the movie. So if you have not watched Spaceman, now would be a good time to pause this video and come back to it after you've actually watched the movie. So let's get started now that we've gotten that out of the way. Here's what I think about this movie. I thought that there are really four main characters when I think about just the big psychological lessons in this movie. There are really four main characters that stood out. There was Jacob, right, who is the commander, also known as Skinny Human. There is Lenka, who is his wife. There is Hanus, who's the spider. And the fourth character is actually Chopra, the space matter. I think all four of them provide really, really important things when we think about just the psychology of the movie. So, Jacob is the commander, and he has been on this voyage for 6 months. And so we know that human beings are wired for connection, right? And so when there is the absence of connection, not seeing people in real life, right? He saw them on the screen, but he didn't really have human contact for at least 6 months. We know that that can cause some psychological strain just because we're wired for connection. And so what happens is we can tell that his presence is beginning to be challenged in space in terms of his mental presence. And so in space, he is really having this existential experience and this real flashback about his life. And so that just really invites Hanus to enter, particularly when there has been the absence of his wife. So his wife, Lenka, is probably the person that he is the most, he's the closest to in terms of human beings. So when she is not there for him, not making the calls and being connected, that's really where we see this role of Hanus really take form, right? Really start to emerge and have this presence. Even though we learn in the movie that Hanus has been there, there's a question about whether or not Hanus has been there for a while, even in childhood, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So we see Hanus, and I think Hanus, I like the character because he's kind of a therapist in the movie, right? And so he is there to support the commander, also known as the skinny human, with really processing his experience, both in the present and a lot of the past experiences that he's had. So that character was so necessary, but the fact that it took the form of a spider made it even more intriguing. And I will share with you in a moment as well why I think that spider was necessary in terms of the character. So those are the three, and I'll get to the space matter in just a minute. So back to the commander. We know that he has had some trauma in his life from his father, this interaction, witnessing everything that happened with his father, as well as we learn in one of the flashback scenes that he experienced a near drowning and his father actually rescues him. And so he's had lots of trauma throughout his life. And we know that trauma results oftentimes with people having difficulty with connection. And it's because of the trust that is eroded through the trauma, right? Because many times when people have had these traumatic experiences, they've seen the worst of humanity. And so it's very difficult for them to trust. And so he's lived this very isolated loner experience. And then he meets Linka. And so that is really the first time he's able to really, really start trying to connect with someone is what we are able to find out from the movie, right? And so they make this pact that they will be together and won't leave each other. And we know that in this movie that was not always true. That did not hold true for them as a couple, because he actually does leave her to go to space. And in some critical moments in Lenka's life, he was not present, right? We learned that she experienced a miscarriage and was alone through that experience. And that's the time where people want to feel the most connected to their partner. And he was not there for her during that period, not really physically there for her during that period. And then here she is pregnant, and he's not really there for her during this pregnancy, the latter part of this pregnancy, where she's about to prepare for her birthing experience. And so that is isolating. So while he is isolated in space, she's very much isolated on Earth, right? This was not what she signed up for when they met. And so she makes the decision for her life that she does not want to have that isolated experience. And so she wants to leave him. And so we see that play out, even though the ground control people shield the commander from that in space. We see that she has made up her mind that she did not sign up for this isolation and wants no parts of that piece of this. So she is seeking connection, and she goes off to connect, to make sure that she's not having this birthing experience alone. Then there's Hanus, and so Hanus is really a pivotal role in this movie, because again, he is the therapist. He is the person that is able to connect with the commander. He is the person that is able to provide an opportunity for the skinny human, as he calls him, to learn how to trust, right? And so he is there to walk him through this past experience, to process it all, to start to make meaning of it. And he's right there. Literally, we see in one of the scenes early on where he has a traumatic experience happen, and there is Hanus coming up from a cup, right? So he's there with him even as he is recalling these very painful parts of his life. The reason why I think that this spider character was so important actually really revealed itself on that spacecraft, where there is a dispute between Hanus and the skinny human, also known as Jacob again. Um, and so it gets a little physical. And what happens in that exchange is that they actually embrace, and there's a connection formed. And so all of those, we think about the all of those legs, right? He is able to embrace him with all of those. Those are all of the arms, the legs, everything that he needed throughout his whole life. All of those embraces that he needed, all of the connection points that he really wanted to have. He was not able to get it then, but he got it in that moment on that spacecraft. And so that was a pivotal scene, I think. And it symbolized that Hanus had done something miraculous, which is to really connect to Jacob in that moment. We see that connection be threatened by just the elements, right? And so we see that there is Hanus and he's dying. And so he leaves the spacecraft, and Jacob goes after him because he's connected to him now. He could be vulnerable with. And so that's when they both enter at that point Chopra, who is the space matter. And so we learned that that space matter is everything. Literally, that's what Anus calls it. It's everything. It is the atonement. It's the atonement that Jacob really needed for his father, for himself even. It's the full atonement, is what Anus described it as. It was everything, all vibrations. It was the beginning and the end wrapped up in one. And we see in that space matter, we see this relationship with Hanus come to an end, right? And so there is grief, there is loss, that in that moment we are able to witness Jacob experience. This one person that he's trust is no longer. But he emerges from that as we see in the final scenes in that South Korea spacecraft. He's a new person, right? So that space matter was the beginning and the end of the old him, and he's emerging as a new person on this spacecraft. So I'd love to know what you think about this movie, right? It was great. It was entertaining to watch. But I'd love to know what your thoughts are.